I do not know what the thrill of potentially getting hypothermia is by way of jumping into a frozen lake, but it seemingly is popular across the nation, and Fort Collins is no exception. The Polar Plunge 5K was just this past weekend, January 21st. And, it's just something to where people run a 5K and then they go and jump in freezing cold waters, which it's a popular thing right now in the health and fitness world of getting, plunged in a ice bath. But I have not necessarily done that. And when I was an athlete in college, I hated doing it. So you're not going to find me doing that. But this episode, live in Fort Collins, these are things that we talk about: what has happened in Fort Collins, what is going to be happening in Fort Collins, a short city council recap, developments that are under review, and then we discuss a singular neighborhood each week. We get a drone video through the neighborhood, kind of an overview, and we lay down some stats for you. So thank you for joining me. This is our fourth week in a row of going live on Wednesday evenings at 6 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. So if there are individuals that are looking at getting more information about Fort Collins and what's happening on a immediate return basis, because a lot of my pre-recorded videos are set to be released weeks in advance, whereas this information is as accurate and up to date as possible. So thank you for joining me. In addition to that, the Polar Plunge this last week, there was a terminal at the Fort Collins Loveland Airport that needs an additional $2 million of funding, and they're asking both Loveland and Fort Collins to pledge $1 million each. Loveland is ready and willing to contribute the $1 million, but Fort Collins is kind of holding back. There's a couple council members that just don't see the benefit of the regional airport, that it's been failing since it started in the 80s. And we've had a temporary gate and terminal there for the last, I don't know how long. We've had Avelo, Allegiant, we have United bus lines that go out there. But I personally, maybe it's because the last time that we had a commercial carrier in Avelo, it really benefited me and my family. It's 12 minutes from my doorstep to the parking lot. And then we were able to fly to Hollywood Burbank through Avelo, which no longer is in existence. And it cut my trip to see my in-laws by about 3.5 hours. So I'm hopeful that something gets done. Currently, what they're discussing is decreasing the amount needed, but that will reduce the terminal from 2 gates to 1 gate, which would be pretty depressing. It'd be instead of a $20 million plus project, closer to a $17 million plus project. So I think the council members were Kelly Olson, and I can't remember the other one. So if you are wanting or in desire of City of Fort Collins to contribute that extra $1 million by way of bonds or through the general fund, reach out to your city council member and let them know that you are in desire of that. I personally am, and so we'll see what happens with that. The last thing I want to talk about of what has happened over the last week is that OtterBox, one of our biggest employers in Fort Collins, had an unspecified amount of layoffs. And I reached out to a couple of buddies of mine and to make sure that they were safe. They're in the clear. OtterBox has been around for many, many years. And when I was graduating high school in 2007, a lot of my friends from Fort Collins High School ended up working at OtterBox because there was a schoolmate of mine. He was a hockey player, very well connected, lots of friends at Fort Collins High School, ended up going and working, whether it was in the warehouse or the office. And a lot of them have been with the company since. So I was concerned, but I'm glad to see that a lot of those friends of mine are still with the company. But it's something to take note of because the health of the real estate market definitely is supply and demand, yes, but ultimately it gets down to jobs and employment. And Northern Colorado during the 2008-2009 crisis generally did pretty well, but it's something to take into consideration in the current climate with the stock market, lots of different things, considering recession possibly. Employment in Fort Collins is extremely important, so we'll definitely keep our eyes and ears open for any other concerns, but hopefully OtterBox, which is blaming, I guess is the word, macroeconomic conditions for these layoffs. So let's go OtterBox, stay strong, and do well. We need you. What is happening next week in Fort Collins, Colorado is the State of the City address And this is going to be the first time since 2020 that you can go in person if you'd like to see it. And it's going to be held. You could also look at it. You can also watch it online, which is what I'm going to do with my family. But State of the City, Mayor Jenny Arndt, going to be talking about what they expect, things to consider, things that happen in 2022 and expectations of 2023. So that is definitely pretty exciting. And also, one thing to take into consideration, Fort Collins, it's a small town. I always talk about how you don't necessarily need reservations anywhere, but Valentine's Day is coming up. And if you haven't yet, which I have not, so, I'm definitely talking to myself here, make reservations for Valentine's Day. A great place is going to the Melting Pot or Social. There's great there. Rare, Italian, Austin's, lots of good options downtown. But if you haven't yet, consider making reservations. People are definitely jumping on it. Valentine's Day, February 14th, falls on a Tuesday, so maybe people are going to be going that weekend before, or you can maybe look towards the following weekend if you haven't yet or can't get reservations. But definitely want to jump on that. City Council meeting that was held last night was a far cry away shorter than it was 2 weeks ago when the Land Development Code and the Rental Housing Program, which we talked about on our last live. If you haven't watched that, definitely worth a watch and consideration. But there was two things that they were really discussing, which was water use, municipality use of those water districts, and how is Fort Collins going to take into consideration this real problem of water, and how are we going to the ability to build and develop moving forward, zero-scaping incentives, water districts, whether it's regional or local, and definitely something to take into consideration. There's a plan in place. More research will be going forward. Nothing necessarily has been adopted by the city council, but it is something that they are all discussing as an immediate concern that we need to address sooner than later, which is interesting because the second item is almost seemingly like the opposite of water conservation, but is urban forestry, and which was crazy. An estimated 443,000 trees are within the city limits of Fort Collins, of which Fort Collins city workers maintain 57,000 trees. And things that they really look at maintaining are canopies over both parking lots, medians, and the city in general. There is 17 full-time employees and 4 hourly employees that take care of those 57,000 trees. Things that they were talking about are how do we deal with trees in residential developments, considering a historic landmark preservation, almost like we have with buildings, but for trees, and definitely something kind of unique. But Fort Collins, if you drive through it, that's one thing that you can absolutely enjoy is these mature trees, and we are very serious about our trees. So I didn't realize 443,000 trees in the city limits of Fort Collins, 443,300. So they're pretty in tune with that. And then they will be addressing how urban forestry is handled in the Land Development Code. Something to take note of that people aren't necessarily maybe paying attention to, but they should, is the Land Development Code that was passed as of January 1st and then got repealed, and it's going to be revised and then going to be resubmitted, is there's actually going to be a phase 2 to this Land Development Code that's more specific to commercial type developments in other areas, not necessarily residential, but very important. So you got to make sure that you're paying attention when the city is putting out this information for you. And I'll try to continue to bring information forward, but something that you definitely want to take into consideration. Phase 1, hotly contested. Phase 2, not as much residential, but definitely something worth taking into consideration and paying attention to. Not much under the developments under review. A storage unit, there's a neighborhood meeting that's happening on, but it's a blue sky self-storage on I-25. Not necessarily something that I'm totally super interested in, but I was talking to a listing that we have coming up here in the near future, and he was talking about potentially putting some of this stuff into self-storage. And there is a lack of or shortage of storage. So not necessarily something that I'm totally informed on, but clearly these people believe that it's a good economic opportunity for them. So there's a neighborhood meeting happening there. Nothing else really happening in developments under review. It's at the beginning of the year, so looking forward to seeing what happens. This week's neighborhood spotlight is Clarendon Hills. Coincidentally, not intentionally, I wish I could say it was intentional. I've done a southeast neighborhood, Fossil Lake Ranch. I've done a northeast neighborhood in Maple Hill, a northwest neighborhood in Brown Farm, and this week I'm doing a southwest neighborhood in Clarendon Hills. And it is definitely one of the more popular neighborhoods in all of Fort Collins, let alone for, the Southwest. So here we go. Clarendon Hills, a lot of these homes were built in the early 90s, between 1990 and 1992. Price points, definitely going to be on the higher side. It's one of the more desirable neighborhoods in Fort Collins. Really probably not going to find anything under $700,000 at this point. And you could go up to $1.1 million over the last 12 months. Then Applewood Estates is pretty close, and that's more of an estate type neighborhood. This is between Shields, Harmony, and Fossil Creek. McGraw Elementary, Weber Middle School, Rocky Mountain High School. Front Range Community College is right behind. There's actually some new builds going on the west side of Clarendon Hills. You're really close to Horseshoes Reservoir. I would say that's probably one of the big drivers of the Southwest is you can easily get to Horseshoes Reservoir from wherever in this neighborhood. You jump on Shields, jump on Harmony, and you're probably 10 minutes versus my 15 minutes. Let's see here. From I-25, you're about 6 miles. Old Town, about 6 miles as well. Similar side of town on the south that I am. But again, you'll see a lot of green space as we're kind of doing this drone video. I think that's one of the most popular things about Clarendon Hills is that you've got ponds, green space, big lot sizes. You're going to see lot sizes here anywhere between, not really under 1/5 of an acre, but you could see up to 1 acre. I sold a home here. You can actually see it as we're flying this drone right here that backs to a pond. I sold it a few years back. A very, very unique house, needed a ton of updating, which is crazy to think. My house, we're going to do a big renovation here shortly. Our house was built in 2000, but appliances, countertops, cabinets, 20 years old, getting a little dated. And especially in the 90s, a lot of oak trim in this neighborhood. So if the house hasn't been updated, it's pretty big. It's about, homes could be anywhere between 3,000 to 4,000 square feet. So beautiful neighborhood, Southwest. McGraw is a great elementary neighborhood school. So definitely a fun neighborhood to look at. Let's see here. Get ready for IPS and pine beetle to come in, huh? I'm not sure. Loveland Lifestyle. What you talking about? Is that you, Connor? But maybe because there's a lot of tree or, I see what you're saying. We're talking about urban forestry. I got you. Yeah, that is definitely something that they're taking into consideration. They were talking about how do you deal with this? How do you afford it? The sustainability of the financial side of urban forestry is definitely a consideration, and maintaining those 57,000 trees. So I got you. We are at 13 minutes and 30 seconds. I guarantee these are not going to go over 15 minutes. I've gone over once. Going to get better at that. But if anyone has any questions, I can stick around for a couple more minutes, and answer those the best I can. Otherwise, 15 minutes, it is a hard stop. Also, if there's anybody who wants me specifically to look at a neighborhood, now would be a great time to let me know. I'm basically going to kind of continue to do what I did on going from southeast, northeast, northwest to southwest, and just keep circling the area. But if you guys have any specific neighborhoods you'd want to see, I'd be happy to take those into consideration. So, man, talking quick on these 15 minutes, but try to get as much helpful information in as short of a time so that you can get back to you and yours while I go upstairs and have dinner here shortly myself. So I don't see any new questions, so I'm not going to stay on for any other reason besides seeing that I got a dang pimple right here. It's freaking 34 years old getting pimples still. All righty. We will see everybody next week, Wednesday, 6 o'clock. Take care.